Alright, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's Limited Level Ups, and we got a really fun one this week. I had a lot of fun putting this episode together. So last week, I talked to a bunch of limited content creators and asked them basically, like, what was your most memorable level up as you were getting better at Limited Magic, or a story that sticks with you, something that's just like, wow, this game I played 15 years ago, that game has really stuck with me, and it taught me something. And that thing that it taught me, I still use today, right? That's kind of the vibe we're going for here. So yeah, got a nice lineup of guests today, and we're gonna start with everybody's favorite data scientist, Sierkovitz. All right, Sierkovitz, welcome back to the show. How's it going?
It's going fine. It took, I don't know how many episodes. Last time I've been on your show was number 200. So where are we now?
We're at like 230, but I also don't exactly number my episodes. Like there's some in there that I don't number, so it's been a while. I would say at least a year and a bit.
Always a pleasure to be here.
All right, so what's so funny. My phone also likes you back. It's like, oh, Sierkovitz. That's me.
Well, Alexa.
Yeah, Alexa and Sierkovitz, exactly. It always happens when you come into my stream. I'm like, oh, hello, Sierkovitz, and yes, phone. I'm not talking to you. Anyways, what have you brought today for our listeners? What is the story or the level up that is memorable to you that you would like to share that you think the listeners would get something out of?
As you might know, but not maybe everyone knows, I had a long gap in my Magic game.
Mm-hmm.
I started in 97 and then played until 2005 and then had a break of however years it took to have Dominaria, the OG Dominaria, the unplayable set, as you know from this podcast.
According to me, yeah.
And me, actually. I fully agree with that assessment, to be fair. Yeah, but I mean, it's like almost 15 years. It's a long time, and I had to relearn how to play Limited basically from scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And the game changed also from the times that I played. I learned in the dark era of the late 90s where definitely life was used as a resource and tempo was everything because the quality of the card did not allow you to last in the long games. And I skipped this whole boomer era, which was, it's all about very small incremental value. It's all about 1/3 of a card advantage somewhere during the game. And the games were glacial and they didn't finish very well. Most of the times in the olden days, the games ended relatively quickly because of either lopsided matchups or lopsided deck building, and it was easier in that way. Like knowing that some cards are powerful was probably like a superpower at that stage.
Right.
When I moved in, people knew the card evaluation roughly. Podcasts did a good job of explaining to people what cards are good. It was not yet the data era. I mean, data era was still to come, but still people had a good evaluation of the card. And because of that, the games evened out, and you needed to be able to accrue this kind of a smaller advantage. And when I started playing, I realized that very often it's like if the deck that you're starting drafting, so the first couple of picks, doesn't come together, it was a problem for me to end up with something playable. And I think the big level up for me was to learn that you can, in fact, pivot much later than you think. I do jump into this during coaching or during chatting with people. They are absolutely frozen about pivoting late in the draft. And I always try to give them this idea that, no, you can, because I had that level up. And for me, it started with not the moment you pivot, but what you do before you start pivoting. It's the situation where you have a weak pack and you can pick this dual land instead of like a marginal 23rd playable.
Yep.
Or you can pick a speculative card that may move you. For example, in Duskmoor very often, because now we had the Duskmoor revival. In the Duskmoor very often, if I didn't see anything very particularly interesting in the pack, I very often picked Emerge from the Cocoon, because that later allows me to pivot into something that is a bit unusual and usually pretty open. But I'm not sacrificing a very good pick. I could pick like a marginal playable, but I will pick that Emerge from Cocoon because if I don't know, happen to open Valgavoth, I can pivot into a Reanimator deck.
Sure.
Or if I pick like late Shroud Stompers, I can pivot into that Reanimator deck because I picked this early card as a speculation rather than picking something as a 23rd playable. And in my head, I sort of talk to myself like that. okay, I can pick this 23rd playable. Am I going to be extremely happy that I have it in my deck? No. So if I play it, I'm not super happy. Am I going to be short on playables? Probably not. And I'd rather be short on playables than play this card.
Right.
So why not pick something with at least an upside? And because I sometimes prepare myself for this pivot by picking here and there cards from the packs where I don't have any particular direction
Mm-hmm.
or any particular power, I will pick a functional outlier rather than even a power outlier. Pack is probably weak, but there is a functional outlier in that pack that allows me to come up with a novel plan and maybe play it. And sometimes it results in me pivoting into a new deck. Sometimes I'll just splash this particularly functionally innovative card because I do like my splashing and I often do that. And very often, my preparation for pivoting is literally picking good fixing that will let me do that kind of stuff and let me play a 3-color deck or 2-color deck with a splash. But I'm preparing myself for that rather than deciding out of the blue in the middle of pack 2 that I want to pivot into something new. That
Yeah.
will rarely happen. But if you have that preparation, it is actually much easier than you think. And you can, mid second pack, you can still pivot if you find a good reason to do so.
Yeah, and one thing that I've said in the past is the whole mantra of like draft the deck you're drafting until you can't, which is to say, okay, well, if there ever comes a pack where my blue-white deck, there's not a very good card for that deck, well, that means I shouldn't take a card from my blue-white deck if there's no good card for it, right? Take a card, like you're saying, from some other deck. Speculate on that, like, weird Reanimator deck or whatever it is. Like, that, in some ways, you might just even think of it like that's reading the draft, right? That is, like, figuring out the open lane, where it's like, hey, there's a good card here. I should probably just take that one. Why not? And, yeah, I really like what you said about when you're a lot of players kind of get frozen, right? They're like, ah, man, like it almost feels like if you don't keep taking cards of your colors, there's maybe this fear of not making playables, and I guess maybe that's a way to distill it, where don't be as afraid of not making playables. I think maybe that's a way to look at it, a different lens too.
Yeah, and I think that it's also what you said is until you can't is very often what I call it is like sort of like death by 1,000 cuts, and by cuts I mean mediocre picks.
Mm-hmm.
When you start maybe with like 2 good green cards, and then your next pack, and the next packs you get like mediocre green cards, but you pick them because you have those 2 green cards, and you think, oh well, the other 2 are so good that I will rather pick those mediocre, and then you go even further into the realms of mediocrity. And you end up with this deck that has maybe 2 really great cards, but the rest is just absolutely replaceable. And I think that in those moments, it's worth realizing what are you fighting for in this particular draft. Like, are those 2 cards worth defending in such a way that you have 21 mediocre cards that accompany them? Or
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's time to find pastures green. And unironically, absolutely unironically, I think that the Spider Omen Paths set is really good for that, because
Right.
you see signals that are much stronger. And because the signals are much stronger, you will be able to read them. If even if you're just learning how to read signals, you will be able to read them much um, much better. And I think that I'm not like, I know that people don't really particularly enjoy the Omen Paths, but I think for this particular aspect, it's a really good training set. And
Yes.
spoiler alert, I'm trying to dive into the signals data from this set and try to cook
Ooh.
something up, because I think that signal reading in this set is actually interesting, and there is some meat on that particular bone.
That is very cool. I look forward to that. Yeah, that's something I have felt too. So I would love to see the actual numbers and see if there's anything substantial there, because that's just like something I felt. And yeah, I like the thing you said where death by 1,000 cuts or bad cards. Sometimes when people send me a draft log and like they want me to review the draft log, I'll look at the deck first usually, and usually when the issue with the deck is there's like 6 to 7 kind of mediocre cards, I can already kind of predict what went wrong in the draft, because almost always when you have 6 or 7 mediocre cards, it means you maybe were supposed to pivot, even swinging all the way back around to your point, later than you might have expected to. Something in pack like 2, 3, where like, hey, I got a bunch of good white cards and I started with red cards, but actually, my 3 red cards I just started with, the good red cards, that's not as good as the 7 good blue cards I'm gonna see in packs 2 and 3. And you gotta kind of be vigilant about it. That's the whole thing, right? You never want to turn your brain off during a draft. That's the beauty
Yeah,
of
no,
it.
that's laziness when
Yeah,
picking is the downfall of all of us. And honestly, it's not that particularly hard to notice that moment. It does require some practice, and initially people panic too much, or stay in the lane too much, or pivot away too fast. But a couple of hundred drafts, you get there.
exactly. Well, I think we're just at our 10-minute mark, which is kind of what I'm aiming for. Thank you so much, Sierkovitz. Very much appreciate you coming on, and we'll have you back on a regular episode sooner rather than later, I'm sure.
That would
But
be
yeah, I'll give you
great.
a second to shout out anything you'd like people to check out. You got your own podcast, and I'm sure not all of my listeners and viewers know about it. So why don't you give a little bit of a shout out there?
Yeah, I'm not going to take too much time for that. And Magic Numbers is my podcast. Sierkovitz is the name. If you really want to find me, you will find me. I would like to shout out how awesome content you have created. I've been preaching the gospel of protocols for a long time already, and I still do believe in that gospel. So continue what you're doing, and everything is going to be just fine.
Well, I appreciate it. All right, and next up, we've got the guy you go to if you ever want to watch somebody win over and over and over again with the worst deck in the format, Dafore. All right, welcome to the podcast, Dafore. How's it going?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm good. All right, so, let us have it. What have you brought for the listeners today? Your story, your level up, your experience, all of the above. What have you brought to share?
Well, I'll start with a limited moment.
Yeah.
Just a moment that kind of I'll remember still, and I think it made me think about drafting a little bit different. So yeah, it just goes back in the days. I don't know, even 10 or more years ago. Maybe it's more now. I'm old. I was actually on a team with Frank Karsten, testing for a PT. A friend got me in. I got lucky. I wasn't at that level, but I was in a team with Frank Karsten, Martin Yuza, Rafael Levy, and people like that.
Nice.
And me, just like a kind of a newbie to the PT.
Yeah.
But a friend got me in. And I remember so vividly. I think I watched the first draft of Frank Karsten. We were testing together at a kind of house in Prague. And I just watched Frank Karsten. He picked Evolving Wilds over, I think, a busted rare. And I was like, what? and he was just casually, oh, I value staying open.
That's so good. Of course, it's important.
Yeah, but what I learned there is, and then later we discussed a lot of that with, and even when I had more experience with drafting, I learned that good players often abandon first picks.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get anything flexible that is guarantee making the deck, and as long as it's not a completely stupid card that would, let's say, okay, let's say something like a coma, or just a really, really good rare. If it's nothing like that, and especially back in the older days, the uncommons weren't that powerful as they are now, right?
Yeah.
Today you just have Bombi uncommons. So you take something like an artifact or something like an Evolving Wilds, which would later make you splash, or even if you're in 2 colors, it makes your mana better, just higher than usual. Because even, I mean, today it's a little bit different, because I think there's rarely a pack where you would actually pick a dual land or Evolving Wilds or even a premium uncommon, but
right.
It's still something. It's just a general concept of knowing that often you're gonna pivot, so something's more flexible, something that makes more maybe archetypes, is higher value early in the draft when you don't have your lane yet, and when you lock in, you can start prioritizing single color cards or the cards in color or even multicolor cards, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's something, if people watch you draft on your channel, which by the way I'm linking in the description of this video, that's something you talk a lot about actually as you're talking through your picks. Like, oh, that's a really good card, but this one's gonna make the deck no matter what. You know, that's something that I hear you say often. And yeah, actually, I'm curious, how long ago was this? Like, do you remember what set was this? What were you? What was the Pro Tour?
It was the um, it was the Eldrazi set, but not the first, not the Rise of Eldrazi. What was the second Eldrazi set?
Battle for Zendikar.
I think it was Battle for Zendikar, yeah, or around that era, because I was at that time I was qualified for a few PTs tested with the same team, so it had to be one of the sets with Evolving Wilds in it, because I vividly remember that Evolving Wilds.
Yeah, I think BFC actually had the Evolving Wilds, so it might have been that set, or maybe it was Zendikar Rising. I don't remember if that one also had it. But you also have a second thing to share too, right? A constructed kind of thought.
Yeah, in general, I think because I was going through like, what should I bring to the call today?
Yeah,
and I didn't really remember that many limited stories, because I think I was more, whenever I did something competitively and I tested a lot, I did more of constructed things. And I think that kind of upped my game in general, because I believe that gameplay wise, constructed is just way deeper, because there's decisions from like turn one on, what like little details, what land to play, what fetch land to crack, like which one drop to play. You don't really get into those scenarios in limited, right?
Totally.
You usually have like two drops, that's maximum. You play one, or you play your land for the turn. If it's a tap land, even better the first turn. You don't need to start like going that deep early in the game. So in my opinion, actually playing a lot of constructed makes your limited gameplay better, because you just go into more layers, into more details. And I remember actually a moment where I completely failed at the back in the days. We used to have national qualifiers which qualified you to World Cup, and I was like, I was striving to get there. I really was like testing or preparing mostly by myself on Modo. And I got completely crushed in one of the finals. I was really close to getting to the World Cup, and I messed up so badly. Like, it was a misplay after a misplay. I should have won like 3 times, and I made like 3 misplays. And I realized how bad of a player I am, actually.
That is a very Dafore thing to say.
No, but seriously, because it made me actually actively, like, before I didn't really, I kind of was confident in my skill, but I didn't see layers to the game. And at that exact tournament, at that exact game, I think I kind of, maybe because I talked to also better players. I know I met Robin Dollar there. He was playing back in the days, won a GP, Slovene player that was always qualified for the World Cup. Because how that worked is, the best player in the country qualified automatically. That was by the DCI rating. And then 3 other people had to go through qualifiers. And in Slovenia, it's not really that hard to qualify. So I was confident I'm gonna get there, because I was preparing. I was preparing, and I thought I got better, like, from last year. Because last year I didn't have a chance, but that year I thought I had a chance. But at that game I realized how bad of a player I am, because I made so many mistakes. But then I just after the game, I talked to Robin Dollar, and he watched me play the whole game. Maybe that's also what made me really nervous. But he was just like, "Oh, that was a mistake. You should have done that." And it's funny how insane it is when somebody unlocks like some things that you couldn't see in a game.
Yes.
Yeah, it just then you see it, and once you see it, because the worst is if you think about mistakes. Like, if you don't see them, if you just think you played perfectly, if it was just luck, and that happens so many times, and that happened to me, and that was like such a I think even like that talk with him, and then it lead into me becoming like a really good friend with Robin. We went to like
Nice.
the seaside together.
Oh,
We
nice.
actually played Magic there, and
Oh, cool.
that was like the second qualifier. There was still one left that year, so we basically just tested with Robin and two other people. Um, uh, at like maybe for a week, just played Magic at the seaside and having fun and all. Um, and that testing was insane. And then I actually qualified
Nice.
the next qualifier.
Well, that sounds nice. Yeah. No, totally.
Yeah.
Like it's really, I think just that in itself, like that moment when you realize, oh, there's so much about this game I'm not clocking. I'm not thinking about this. I didn't think about this the right way. Like I think there comes this moment in every Magic player's career where they're like, "Hey, I'm pretty good now," whatever that means to them. And then you look back a year later and you're like, "Wow, I was really bad then." Right? It's Magic's it's like, it almost feels like it's like infinite skill ceiling, you know. Oh, you can always be better.
Yeah, and it's important, I think, is to expose yourself to good players.
Yeah.
Like just to have that opinion, because they're gonna see, like it's gonna be obvious for them that you did mistake, but they will unlock something that you didn't see, and that's so huge, I think.
Yes, absolutely. Other people have said that too. Not like that's been a common theme actually of people I've talked to so far for this episode. Well, thank you so much for lending your time coming on. Like I said, I will post a link to your channel in the description. If you don't already watch Dafore's draft videos, would highly recommend him. He's very in-depth with the explanations and a very good drafter too. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Okay, and next up, we've got new kid on the Limited Podcast block, Sam Pratt of Rough Drafts. All right, Sam Pratt, welcome to the show, and I would love to hear what you got to bring to the crowd today, to our listeners, because I think that a lot of the people I've talked to so far have been like, you know, these like super long time players. And just remind me, when did you start playing Magic?
I've been playing Magic for 20 years, but I've only been seriously drafting for 6 or 7.
Yeah.
So like relatively Magic Zoomer vibes in terms of draft. Yeah.
Yeah, I say that like I actually didn't actually know that you've been playing that long, but the vibes I get from you generally just when you're talking about cards, it is a little more Zoomer vibe. So it's great to hear level ups from like newer-ish players, or I guess I should say newer-ish to competitive limited. Actually, what was your first set? Because that's I don't think I know that. Like first, like that you really tried hard on for limited. Let's put it that way.
Probably Guilds of Ravnica.
Yeah.
Because that's when like arena drafting was like, or that was like arena open beta rather than closed beta. And I don't really remember a lot from that, but I remember doing probably at least 20 drafts, maybe 30, which was like way more than I had done before at the time.
Okay, well, I guess without further ado, give us your Zoomer level up or story that you have to share with the listeners today.
Yeah, so this is a gameplay level up that actually happened in Constructed, and it really informed like my gameplay in Limited as well, sort of like all aspects of playing Magic. So I used to play like a decent amount of Pioneer, pretty exclusively playing Black-Red Midrange, which if you don't remember that deck, I don't know if it exists anymore. I don't play Constructed. It's got like Blood Tithe Harvester, Fable the Mirror Breaker, Thoughtseize, Shieldred. And I remember specifically I was playing against like a mono blue spirits deck, which is just a very traditional like tempo deck. Like they play a lot of cheap flyers with flash and protection spells and stuff. And I remember casting my Thoughtseize turn 1. I think I was on the play. They reveal their hand and there's like a bunch of 1/1s with flash and a bunch of protection spells. Like I can't remember the names of any of the cards, like Siren Storm Tamer, where you can protect a different creature by sacrificing it. And my hand's like Blood Tithe Harvester, Bone Crusher Giant, Fatal Push. I'm like, oh man, I have to line up, you know, like I have to line up, like tap, sack my Blood Tithe Harvester, and then like I have to like Fatal Push something, and then when they go to protect it, I have to Bone Crusher it. And I thought for a while on my Thoughtseize decision, and then I sort of took a step back and I went, wait a second. I could play a 2 mana 3/2 and a 3 mana 4/3, and they're a bunch of 1/1 flyers. So you can just kind of like take their threat, play a 3/2, play a 4/3, and just kill them in 4 turns. And that's exactly what I did. And I was like, oh, I'm the beatdown here. Like, I can very easily win if I just play my guys out under their counter magic and just attack them. Like, what are they going to do? Block me? They have 1/1 flyers.
Yeah, well, I love that. What are they going to do? Block? Like, yeah, absolutely not. That's a great point. I remember having a very similar level up, like while playing Limited, where I think when you start playing Magic, it's intimidating in a lot of ways. And part of that intimidation is you don't know you don't know how you might die. You don't know how the game might go wrong. You don't know, what tricks the opponent has up their sleeves. And I think we kind of carry that for a while, and we kind of think a little bit too defensively a lot of the time, right? And there's often this point as players where you go exactly what you said, where it's like, oh, actually, my opponent is just as afraid of me as I am of them, and maybe even more, right? Like, I don't know the exact dynamics of that Pioneer matchup, but it might be the case that, like, the red-black opponent's like, the Spirits opponent's like, oh, crap, I'm facing red-black this round. Like, that's a disaster, you know?
And it's so much of the old mid-range type of decks, like Boomer Jund, was so much about, like, I'm going to use, like, Liliana to take your threat, and then I'm going to Lightning Bolt it, and I'm going to, like, trade my Tarmogoyf, and then I'm going to finish you with, like, Raging Ravine.
Right.
And that, like, so much about a mid-range deck also, like, the part that people don't think about is just, like, being able to pressure decks that are slower than you. Because decks that are slower than you are going to win the long game always, like, never be the smaller mid-range deck. So, like, if you feel like your opponent's going to outcard you, you need to be able to set up some sort of engine. You need to be able to, like, pressure their life total to limit their options on defense.
Yes, that's a key thing. That's something we could talk, I'm sure, at length, like an hour, about. Like, when you pressure your opponent's life total, it reduces their options. Like, that's a level up in its own, right? And
that's really what people, I think, a big part of your life total is a resource means is, like, if your opponent attacks you, if you have a high life total, you have the resource of an option of being like, actually, I'm just going to take the damage and maybe, like, race you back, or, like, maybe this creature grows in some way and I can take the hit now because it's going to be virtual card advantage on blocks later. So there's, like, so much in terms of the combat step that people don't really think about in terms of gaining and losing resources based on just a life total. And I think Edge of Eternities was such a good example of this, because, like, having a high life total was so important to be able to take a turn off to station your spacecraft. Because if you're at too low a life total, you lost the ability to station. Like, your cards became blank. So you were gaining, like, card advantage by trading your life total as a resource, or, like, protecting your life total as a resource to be able to dump that into powerful spacecraft.
Yeah, and it's not just spacecraft. There's been, I can't even remember off the top of my head, but there's been some mechanics, maybe in the past few years, that are kind of similar, where they ask you to tap creatures, maybe at sorcery speed, take blockers out of the equation. And that sounds really, really terrible if you're already behind. But, if you're doing all the things that you're supposed to do as a good limited player, get on board, have a good curve of creatures, all that kind of stuff, you get that option back, right? You get that optionality, and that mechanic that seems really bad when you're behind doesn't seem as bad if you're connecting to the board, playing your cards, all that kind of stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and this, I'm curious, like, when you had this constructed level up, did you immediately go, I can apply this to my limited games? Or was that kind of something that maybe was more subtle, maybe kind of you infused it into your limited games there on out, but maybe not as consciously? I guess what I'm trying to get at is, when we're talking about level ups in general, and, my whole show is about this, I like to kind of document the process, or maybe explain the process of, like, how you take a piece of information that you've learned and actually say, hey, I'm going to apply this to my game somehow. Like, I wonder what that was like for you.
I think it was pretty subconscious. Like, I vaguely remember what era this was in. I think it was around Dominaria United when I was playing a lot of Pioneer.
Sounds
actually
about right. Yeah.
The next set after that was Brothers War, which was very much about pressuring your opponent's life total, like getting the inevitability out of your graveyard with the unearthed creatures, just like making chump attacks to kind of like last ditch effort finish your opponent off. So I think like I think it was in the next set where that was actually where being able to be like, I'm going to start pressuring you early to gain an advantage and reduce your options later. I think Brothers War was a really good specific training ground for that.
Mm-hmm.
But to be honest, I think this was more of a subconscious shift
Yeah.
that happened for me, like holistically in all of Magic. Just because at the time I was playing a decent amount of Constructed alongside Limited.
Yeah, and I think that's generally how it is, right? It's not often you learn something and you're like, oh, switch is flipped, and now I'm like 5% better at this game. It's great when you do have those level ups, but most of them are like, yeah, a little more subconscious than that.
Yeah. And I have a background in music. Like I played a lot of jazz, like
Yeah.
I play saxophone, and like you're improvising there just to do a little bit of a corny tie-in, but there's so much of improvisation is like learning these fundamentals of sort of what sounds good where and being able to pick that up in your ear and apply that on the fly later. But you really need like the technical fundamental knowledge to be able to actually apply that effectively later on.
Yeah.
And I think that applies very much to Limited, especially.
Side note here, I confirm for me if this is right. Are you playing on your podcast intro and outro music? Is that you playing the bass there?
Yeah, I'm on bass there. Yeah, bass is a different. I mostly play saxophone, but I also do like guitar and bass.
Sweet.
As well.
Yeah, I saw a comment on your latest episode. Somebody mentioned like, oh, I love this slide from this note to this note. Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, that was I had no idea. So that's sweet. That's one more enjoyable cool thing about your podcast, which I will shout out quickly. Rough Drafts. Everybody I'm interviewing, a link in the description. But if you're new to Rough Drafts, the newest limited podcast on the block, it's really great. I've got a lot of people that I've known for a very long time, longtime Magic players have said, hey, this new podcast, like, go check it out if you haven't, because Sam's doing good stuff over there. So keep up the good work, Sam. Next up, we've got somebody with one of the largest, if not the largest, I'm not actually sure, but one of the largest limited YouTube channels out there, NicolaiBolas. All right, welcome, Nicolai. Nicolai, I think this is actually the first time you've been on this podcast. I've been on your channel a lot, but first time we're housing you. How's it going?
It feels great to finally be here. I feel like I've leveled up already.
Yes, that is lovely to hear. So you have brought for us a few stories of your early Magic development that I think are really great. You filled me in a little bit of a preview of them beforehand. But yeah, just take it away, I think. I would love to hear your tales of early limited player Nicolai.
Okay, so my first story doesn't involve limited per se, but it does involve limited gameplay of sorts, which is the first intro deck that I ever used. And that was a deck back in Dark Ascension called Grave Power. And the thing about Grave Power is that it was a deck filled with graveyard synergies. It had self-mill cards where you like play the card, it mills you over with stuff, and then cards that cared about having things in the graveyard. So like the feature card cost 1 less mana for every creature in your graveyard. So it was a deck built around the graveyard. But as a new player, I hated self-mill because what if I mill my good cards?
Of course.
So I proceeded to buy, or maybe it came with a booster pack, and I replaced all of the self-mill cards with cards that were not self-mill related. So it would be like replacing my card that like milled 4 cards from my deck, which like was a really good card, a linchpin of the strategy, with like a 4-mana 3/2 flyer, which I then proceeded to love because flying was like the mechanic that I liked, and it was like winning me a lot of games. Because at the same time, my brother had gotten a starter deck that was sacrifice themed called Dark Sacrifice, and then proceeded to cut all of the sacrifice cards because he didn't like sacrificing his own creatures. So what ended up happening was we both just played vanilla Magic decks against each other as Garfield intended, with no synergy. And the first time I went to play Draft, I learned that you have to build a deck instead of just jamming random cards against each other. I think like the second card I ever picked was like Segmented Crow-Tick, which was like, I think a vanilla 6-mana 6/5 or something. It was like my second pick. And I think I picked it partly because it was foil and partly because I was just like, this is a big creature. This will win me the game.
How do they ever beat this thing? It's gigantic, right? Like
exactly. It was like, yeah. So it's like the sort of thing where you learn over time. My friend had to explain to me that self-mill is actually a good thing. The person that taught me a lot of essential strategy for Magic the Gathering was telling me like if you started the game with like 10 cards like milled into your library, it gives you a huge advantage because you have all of the information on what's there, you know what you're going to draw more likely, and also fueling all of your synergies, of course. So that was a major level up for me, is learning that you should be building a deck and not just jamming random vanilla decks against each other. I took the power out of Grave Power with my starter deck. It's like they give you a booster pack so you can make improvements, and I just immediately made it worse, just like instantly. But yeah, that's a major level up from early limited.
Yeah,
Self mill is good, folks.
I think that exactly that right there too. Like that's something that I talked about recently on the podcast, maybe like a few months ago, about like just remember self mill is actually good. I can't remember. Oh, it was Final Fantasy because there was a lot of self mill in that set. It's like Town Greeter, that card's great. The Revelation, the look at the top three, take one. That card's great, and it's one of those things that even when you hear like, okay, self mill is good, self mill is good. It's so hard to like really internalize, right? Like I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remembered, but do you remember the moment where you're like, okay, I actually get it. I know I'm not losing something when I'm
Yeah,
milling, right?
I think the one that first got me was when somebody said, "Well, you could mill your good card, but you could also mill all of the cards that get you to your good card,"
Mm-hmm.
which was a big thing. And then another one was like, if the good card could easily just be on the bottom of your deck anyway, you have no idea that you're going to draw it. And so, one thing that helped me think about it a lot was if I have half as much, like the reason you play the bare minimum number of cards in your deck is so that you draw your good cards more often. But if you could play even fewer cards in your deck and just know more about them, like if your deck was
Yeah.
like 20 cards and you knew all the cards in your deck, you would have such knowledge over what you're going to draw. Like when you have 10 cards in your deck and you're drawing 10% of your deck every time. If you have 20 cards in your deck, you're drawing like 5% of your cards like every turn. So it's like if I have one removal spell in my deck, I know, okay, I can plan towards drawing this removal spell. Much more likely if I know that it's one of 5 cards than one of 20 cards or something like that.
Yeah.
So you just make better plans over time when you have more information, and your opponent knows nothing about your deck. So if you've milled over cards, they don't know. But I get to play to my outs a lot more as I've gotten better. That's something I like about self mill that maybe I didn't fully appreciate at the beginning. But like just knowing like, okay, it's going to help me regardless. Like people will ask me like, I'll mill cards even when I have no graveyard synergies, and they'll say, why did you do that?
Yep.
And it's just for that information gain. And I think that's a really cool synergy level up that I remember very vividly because it was like my first time playing Magic was with this graveyard deck that didn't really use the graveyard.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that point up because I think a lot of times when we focus on that mill fallacy, it is like a lot of the first points you mentioned of like, oh, you'll mill towards your better cards, but that information aspect is, or sorry, you're just as likely to mill towards your good cards as you are to mill them. But that information aspect, I think exactly the same thing. Like I'll mill when I have no mill synergy. Somebody will ask, why did you do that? I wanted to know what cards I'm not going to draw. And there's really
Yeah, exactly.
a very minuscule downside, as in like the minuscule downside is this deck, this game might go to decking. And milling 3 cards might have mattered. If you don't think the game's going to go to decking, it just doesn't matter math-wise.
Yeah, exactly. It's irrelevant almost. So that's like was a big level up for me from my early time playing.
Not one to turn down a good 2 for 1. Nicolai actually has 2 stories for us today. So
yes.
What's the second thing?
Yes. So this second story is also a major level up for me, and it involves one of the very few prize packs I was able to win when I first started drafting. Because I started drafting in Dragons of Tarkir, which was a like set just like had a bunch of mechanics, a bunch of cards, but I wasn't very good, so I didn't win a lot of the booster packs. But every time I did win a booster pack, I would open it up and look through all the cards, and then immediately text my friend who was like way better than me at Magic and kind of taught me the basics. And ask him how good each card was in draft.
Yeah.
And there was one card in particular, Foul Tongue Shriek, that I remember having an epiphany moment with because I opened this card and it's like a 1 mana like card. It's black and it like does 1 damage for each attacking creature you have to your opponent, and you gain 1 life for each of them. And it's really bad. Like it's a horrifically bad card.
Yes, very bad.
Reading it back now, I feel like it's a sort of level up that would be irrelevant to players because they don't make cards that bad anymore. That's how bad it was. And this isn't even old days Magic, like old days. This is just old-ish days Magic at this point. If you put Foul Tongue Shriek into any modern set, people would laugh at you.
Yes.
But at the time, it was the sort of card they made. And I remember reading it and thinking this card's pretty good because it only costs me a single mana and I'll deal some damage to my opponent.
Yeah.
And what I had to learn was that the cost of Foul Tongue Shriek isn't just the mana cost. It's the fact that it's a card from my deck that doesn't do very much. And the way my friend explained it to me was if I had a deck that was all Foul Tongue Shrieks, or like I had like 5 Foul Tongue Shrieks in my deck, I'm not going to be able to do anything. So even if I just have like even these sorts of cards where you're just playing them, they don't do anything, they don't help you win the game, and you end up in a situation where you're like falling behind by casting your spells, which is never something you want to be doing. You want your spells to help you, and not even keeping in mind that Foul Tongue Shriek is inherently like a win more card. You need to have attacking creatures, all of this stuff, but it also like fundamentally, even when it does what you think it'll do, it kind of puts you behind a little bit by just being a card in your hand. And that's something I had to learn because it's easy to think mana is a resource, creatures in play are a resource, but like your cards actually like doing something is also a resource as well.
Yeah, I think there's some part of this about as a newer player, as we get better as players and we develop card evaluation tools, we become much more critical, I think, of new cards when we see them, kind of almost viewing them through a cynical lens. But I think as a new player, you kind of look at it as like, wow, I can imagine like the ceiling of this card. I can imagine how good this foul tongue trick, like I could be attacking with 6 creatures and 1 mana drain, like kill them. And I think exactly what you said. You just got to balance that with like, is this actually a piece of material worth a card, good on average, right? Because that's always what we're aiming for, right? Averages, good averages.
Yeah. It's often called Magical Christmas Land, which is a place that you live. One last thing, there was a very, very good uncommon in that set called Rakshasa Gravecaller that was a 5 mana 3/6, and then you could exploit a creature to make 2 2/2s. And at the time, that was like a very good card, and you would like always take it if you saw it. I was not quite aware of this because I had witnessed a game where my opponent had this card called Sprinting Warbrute, which was like a creature that was a 5/4, but you could dash it, so it had haste. And I happened to walk up as they were playing Sprinting Warbrute against an opponent at exactly 5 life and no creatures in play. So every turn that I was watching this game, they would play a creature, their opponent would Sprinting Warbrute with haste, and they would have to like chump block with their creature.
Yeah.
And I just watched this thinking that Sprinting Warbrute was the greatest card I had ever seen in my life.
So busted.
And I think I proceeded to draft like 4 or 5 of them in my next draft over very good cards. Like I think I like first picked one or something like that. I was like, this card is insane. Like I've witnessed the truth. It like has to attack too. Like it's terrible. It's like a really bad card.
Yeah, but, I remember that. That was was that your first format, by the way, Dragon's Dark Year?
Yeah, that was my first format. That's why a lot of these lessons come from there. It's like okay, lessons learned, of course. But yeah, those sorts of things. I think Magical Christmas Land, looking for averages and making sure your cards do something are very important.
Well, Nicolai, thank you so much for giving us some time here. Appreciate it. And I'm sure sometime in the future you'll be back. All right, next up we've got who I think, for my money, is the hardest working content creator out there. We got Jim Davis, coming to talk a little limited with us. All right, Jim Davis, welcome to the show. How's it going?
It's going great.
Great. Well, Jim is has thankfully taken some time out of his busy schedule, meeting us from the hotel room. So appreciate that, Jim. Jim, what have you brought to the show today for the people out there? What is your memorable level up moment as a limited player? The path of improvement, for Jim Davis, what did that look like?
So I was forged in the fires of the very, very early days of Magic Online. I started playing in high school, about when Magic Online first came out. It was in 7th edition Invasion Block and stuff. And I remember I was working at Office Max and I picked up a game in Forward Magazine. And they reviewed Magic Online in it or whatever. And there was an article, something about from Gary Wise. That had been an article. I don't remember exactly, but something from Gary Wise, who's an old pro over the sideboard. And he wrote about going infinite drafting, where you would draft, you would sell your rares, you would get your winnings, you would just keep drafting for free. And that idea just like tantalized me.
Yeah.
Wow, cool. I can just play forever. And I wasn't very good because I was just like a kitchen table player. So it was a pretty, it was a crucible for sure. And I would do a draft, and back then cards on Magic Online were worth something. Like it was like 3 ticks for a rare, and I would do a thing you weren't supposed to do and camp out in the casual room and just be like, hey, I don't want to buy any rares, And if a mod saw me, I could run back into the trading room or whatever. But I was 19 years old, infinite time in my hands.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing my 7th edition drafts and stuff, and I have a game where I have a hill giant and they have a giant octopus, and I attack with my hill giant and they block. They put damage in the stack. Boomers know what I'm talking about. And they unsummon their octopus.
Ooh.
It leaves play. And I'm like, okay. And then my hill giant still died. And I was like, what the hell just happened? What's going on?
Yeah.
So I typed in chat. Chat was friendlier back in the day because it was more like that was kind of the experience. And I was like, what just happened? Whatever. And they kind of, in rudimentarily explained to me I put damage on the stack, damage locks in. And then you have a chance to play spells and effects, so the damage is locked in. And again, if you're, reader player or a newer player, that hasn't been the rule for a decade or more or whatever. But even though it's not the rule now, that was my window into oh, there's a lot more to this game than I'm really realizing,
Yeah.
And so kind of just a lot of learning trial by fire, reading some articles here and there. Magic content was not, than what it is now. There was no limited level ups, no limited resources, it was, it wasn't streamers to watch and stuff. So a lot of trial by fire and a lot of grinding, onslaught block drafts, Mirrodin block drafts. Still have a fond appreciation for those formats. And here I am now.
Yeah. Do you remember, I actually took a very similar path as you, just grinding as a very new player on Magic Online, wanted to quit because I thought the game was cheating me somehow when I didn't know how to set my stops or whatever it was. But do you remember like how long it took you before you felt like, oh, I'm actually fairly decent at this game?
It's interesting because like the average player was so bad back then,
Right.
comparatively, because there wasn't this like wealth of information just everywhere, YouTube, podcasts, So I don't really recall like when like the switch flipped or whatever, but I do know, I was drafting 5 times a day. I was at the point where I could like, sell my rares on the side and like, fund my drafts and stuff. And it was a big pride point to like not take out your credit card when you're playing Magic Online.
For sure. Oh, I remember that.
And then I finally ventured into paper for Legions. That was the second set in the Onslaught block.
Nice.
So that's like, maybe a year or so after me kind of playing a lot. And went to Legions pre-release, my first ever paper event, got my DCI card. I think I went like 3-1 and 3-1. And I saw an ad for a PTQ the next weekend. It was that neutral round in New York City. Brian David Marshall's old store. It was like the mecca for Magic in New York City.
Yeah.
It was awesome. And I'm like, all right, I'll try that. Sure. So I took a trade out from Long Island for the PTQ. It was Onslaught Legion sealed. I had a pretty cool black-white deck with a Silent Spectre or something like that. Go 6-1, top 8 the PTQ.
Beauty.
Top 8 drafts, I don't know anybody I'm just like, I don't know anyone.
Yeah.
And everyone's kind of like, who's this guy?
Yeah.
And top 8 the draft, my deck wasn't great, and I was going to beat a better deck in the quarterfinals, and I mistapped my mana in game 3, where I had this creature that like pumped for green 1. And I had 6 green, but I tapped like 3 the first time or whatever.
Brutal.
Punted and lost, but that was like, a huge, like, I'm hooked on this, like, and the thing was that even though I wasn't really that good, the average Magic Online player was so much better than the average paper player because they were doing 10 times the volume of drafts.
Yeah.
So it was kind of just brute forcing your way to being decent at Magic.
Yeah. Like you mentioned all the content that you didn't have back in the day, but I think that's a huge component too. Just the access of everybody now playing at such a high volume, right? Like you see this in Constructed. I see the effects of this in Limited. People are just better at the game now because, hey, what a surprise. Practice actually does something, right? Being able to build that intuition, that like matters for so much.
And the wealth of knowledge too. We're just the sum of all games played before us,
Yep.
And now there are so many games played, and it's just like hard for an invested player who's interested to not be that good. They can watch, Reed Duke play a Modern League, and they can watch, Luis draft or whatever. There's just such a level of access, in the last 5-10 years content wise that players didn't have 20 years ago at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jim, thank you so much for taking the time. If you don't already follow Jim and his content, highly recommend. I always say Jim's some of the only constructed content that I follow, and he also does Limited as well. So go check him out. Links in the description. Jim, thanks so much for joining us for today.
Thanks for having me. Love the show. Happy to be here.
Next up, we've got Ryan Condon, who does a lot of things, is on Team Sanctum for Pro Tours, writes excellent, exceptional articles, and also is extremely on top of things, because when I messaged Ryan to be like, yeah, hey, I'm doing this kind of episode, would you like to come on? I sent that message at night right before I went to bed, and I woke up with a video response in my DMs. So before we could even jump on a call, I had the content. So thank you for Ryan for being so proactive, and let's hear what Ryan has to say.
Hey, Alex. So you wanted us to talk about our biggest level ups in Limited or memorable stories from our development as Limited players. And I don't actually have a very particular instance of a huge level up that happened for me where I thought, wow, I didn't know this before, and this kind of unlocked a huge understanding of how Limited works. I think the thing that I've consistently experienced throughout my growth as a Limited player is that going to people who I respect and trust their Limited expertise in, and simply having them critique my play. Doing draft log reviews, game reviews, having someone sit down on one of my drafts, any of that has always resulted in me feeling like I'm improving as a player. So one example of this, the first time that I really felt this super strongly was posting my qualifier weekend or arena open pools in your Discord. I think it's a great community full of a bunch of really strong players, and I am one of those strong players. I have been a very strong Limited player for a long time, but I think posting my sealed builds and trying to collect feedback on them definitely helped me succeed and just improve and kind of see the parts of the game that I might have been missing. It actually helped me qualify for the first arena championship, and then that was my first professional event and kind of got me onto the Pro Tour. Since then, I've been learning a lot from my Sanctum teammates, and I've noticed just how much draft log review I do before a big event really, really helps with my limited performance at that event. I basically just wanted to kind of give a perspective of, no matter how strong of a player you are, going to other people and asking for them to give you feedback, give you critique, just try to find any kind of mistakes that you're making in your games is going to be the best, most consistent, most reliable way to level up for anyone at any level. And I think sometimes people miss that. Sometimes people are looking for these big, inspiration moments when really it's a lot about just consistent improvement. So wanted to speak to that a little bit, because that's honestly, it's been my experience of how I've gotten better at Limited.
All right, and last but certainly not least, we've got Marc Anderson, my set review partner. All right, somebody who is very familiar with being on the show. Marc, welcome back, and I'm sure we'll see you in a few weeks' time. What is your story / level up that you've brought for the listeners today?
Yeah, so when you reached out with this, I had a tough time remembering like my first few level ups, because I've been playing for, over 2 decades at this point.
Yeah.
So the most recent one that I could think of that would be applicable would actually be during COVID, when I first installed Arena and started like coming back to the game and playing Limited again. Because everything was on lockdown, I would hang out with friends through Discord, and I started just like streaming my Limited games. So we were playing Kaldheim at the time, and I was, streaming games of Kaldheim, and a mix of, players of different qualities would be in there. But one friend in particular, a friend who taught me the game many years ago, also named Mark, he would jump on my calls frequently, and there would be spots where we'd be mapping out complicated turns and having fantastic games. And then there was about 4 or 5 times when he was like, well, what happens if we just attack with everything here? And for me, like, I had been so focused, you're playing the value game. You haven't played booster draft in a long time. You're really focused on like just making profitable attacks and making sure you're always ahead on board. It can be hard to really like turn the dial to be like, okay, I can throw away like 2 creatures if I'm going to push, 8 to 10 damage.
Yeah.
But because it wasn't just once, because it was like 4 or 5 times, it got to the point where it's like, okay, obviously this is a leak in my game where I could actually improve and push more damage and win more games that I'm ahead in. So I really took that on board, and like I think it improved me as a Limited player, which just shows you even after like 20 years, you can still get better.
Yeah, the boomer tendencies can be washed away with a little bit of work. And I'm
For
curious,
sure.
so like, this moment of like, oh, I should be doing this more. You realize that as a player. How long did it take you, or does it take you, with any of your realizations that you might have had over the years, to actually like integrate that into, oh, now I'm actually doing that better? Like, is it instantaneous? Does it take some time for you?
Well, for that one, because it was so much like reinforcement repeatedly over like a fairly short period of time, it was like pretty effective. I think a lot of the earlier days when things was slower to disseminate, it took longer to absorb things. But also like the pace of games and everything moved so much slower. There was so much less content to digest.
Yeah.
That you really could just like read an article written by like, we had a lot of excellent writers back in the day and not so much on the streaming side. And if you went and read an article by, Flores or Svi Moshowitz or Pat Chapin or PV or whoever, you would have a lot of time to think about it before you got your next chance to play Magic. So
yeah.
I think that's kind of a shift in everything's kind of go now. Data changes. Like by the day Arena drops, you're doing one thing, and then 24 hours later you have data and you're kind of already altering drastically the way you approach the format just based on the information available. So things move a lot faster now, but still takes time to let those lessons sink in sometimes.
Yeah, totally. And on the nature of that, combat centric, level up, you're like, that is something that I think is probably just like a good question to ask yourself in a lot of situations. Like, what happens if we just attack all here? Like, I don't know how you think about it. Maybe you think about it a little bit differently, but I almost at this point think of that as my default question. Like, my step one is, can I just attack all here? And if not, you dial it back and go, okay, maybe we can't attack with everything. Maybe we have to hold back one blocker. I don't know. Do you think of it kind of similarly, or are you more, oh, you like, is it more for you realize there's a spot in the game where like, oh, this is a time I should attack all, or is it the opposite where it's like, that's your default?
Yeah, I do think I've become a much more aggressive player over the past 5 years, just because like things now are a lot more pushed. The early turns, like creature sizing, is much bigger than it used to be before. It's a lot easier to see the end of the game in sight because you can be ahead by only a few resources and push a lot of damage. Whereas in the past, if you were playing 10, 20 years ago, you might have, 3 more creatures than your opponent, but they're all just like a bunch of tutus.
Right, yeah. Hard to really leverage those in a super meaningful way where it's like, I'm slightly ahead on board, but like, I'm not really accomplishing that. We just all trade off, and then, I'm not actually pushing that much damage.
Yeah, it used to be that like Windrakes were good because the ground got gummed up so quickly.
Right.
That someone would play a 3/3 and no one could attack anymore.
Right.
Like,
yeah, we live in a very different era of limited Magic now. Well, Mark, thank you so much for giving us your time here today. I'm sure, like I said, we'll see you in a few weeks for the set review. Anything you want to leave us with, or just say goodbye?
No, my pleasure. It's always nice to hop on these, and we'll catch you for the next set review.
Awesome. And with that, we will sunset today's episode. Thanks so much for watching and listening. Hope you enjoyed this style of episode. If you did, leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff on the YouTube video. Patreon, link in the description if you want to support the show. As this episode is being posted, I'm actually on vacation. I mentioned this last week, and so there will not be a Limited Level Ups episode next week, but we'll be back the week after for another level up, and I think right after that is even the set review. The Avatar set review will be the episode after the one I come back. So, Magic, as always, keeps on ticking. We'll see you later, everybody.